In today's video, we are going to be discussing the narcissistic family and many of the toxic and destructive family dynamics that manifest in families like mine. We are also going to be talking about some of the issues many adult children of narcissists experience and challenges that they have in their adult life and relationships. So if you come from a narcissistic family, or if you suspect you might or know someone who does, today's video is for you. But first, if you're new to my channel, I'd like to take a moment and welcome you and invite you to please subscribe and be sure and hit that notification bell because I put out new videos every week. Also, if you are interested in private one-on-one narcissistic abuse recovery coaching with me, please visit my website. It's linked in the description below. So today we're talking about some issues and challenges that many members of a narcissistic family are faced with. It's very common, unfortunately, for an adult who was raised in a narcissistic family to be filled with unacknowledged and repressed anger. Many times that person may feel depressed or struggle with developing their own identity. Anxiety issues are also very common, or feeling like you're hollow, inadequate, or defective. Lots of times adult children of narcissists have some pretty heavy emotional regulation and relationship issues. Narcissistic families operate by a set of unspoken rules, and if we are going to survive in a family like this, then we learn very quickly that we must abide by those rules, however confusing, intrusive, humiliating, or even ridiculous they may be, and usually always are. And what happens is that these rules block our emotional access to our narcissistic parents. Our needs are neglected or ignored. Our emotional developmental milestones are not achieved, and many times we will feel completely invisible or completely micromanaged, both of which are incredibly destructive for our growth and well-being. Another tragic reality of being raised in one of these families is these unspoken rules also allow our narcissistic parents to have boundaryless access to our lives, which usually means they can abuse us anytime they choose. And because of all of these things, some very disturbing and completely toxic intergenerational trauma-producing behaviors and dynamics start to manifest. And we're going to talk about what some of those things are in these types of families. So now let's talk about many of the very damaging and toxic rules these families subject its members to, specifically the children. First, and probably the most obvious in these families, they do not acknowledge or address anyone's feelings. Feelings are completely denied and not addressed or discussed. So children in these families are taught to ignore, suppress, repress their normal feelings, especially any feelings that their narcissistic parent views as taboo. So any negative feelings the child might have that their narcissistic parent doesn't want to deal with, or God forbid, any feelings that the child needs to express that would require their narcissistic parent to self-reflect or address and change any toxic or abusive behavior, is a huge no-no. So when and if this happens, the narcissistic parent might shame this child for expressing those feelings, or they might just ignore the child and withdraw any love or affection. Or that child might even be met with narcissistic rage for expressing those feelings. But that child will get the message loud and clear very quickly: you are not ever allowed to express those types of feelings. So the child learns to suppress those emotions, compartmentalizing those feelings, or even learns to start shaming themselves when they feel those feelings, all of which are incredibly damaging for that child's development and emotional health and well-being. Next, secrets are the norm in these families. A very common unspoken rule in narcissistic families is we deny and never talk about what the reality looks like behind closed doors. We act as if our narcissistic parent and abusive parent is deserving of the Parent of the Year award. And even though the children's needs are not being acknowledged or met, we never act or talk about that, but rather lie and portray an image that we have the perfect family. Image is everything, and it doesn't matter if it has no basis in reality. That is a secret we learn never to talk about. Next, triangulation between siblings is encouraged, not love. Siblings in narcissistic families are taught to fight with each other. I think this is probably one of the most heartbreaking components to being raised in a narcissistic family. In healthy families, siblings are encouraged to love each other, support and respect each other, and usually that will build into a really beautiful relationship for the siblings as adults. However, in narcissistic families, siblings are taught to compete with each other, degrade, insult, and shame one another. I personally have 3 sisters, and quite frankly, those relationships have grown into ones of abuse, control, or are now completely non-existent relationships. And even though I love all of my sisters, I only have a loving relationship with one, and I rarely talk to her or spend time with her family. There is so much damage that is created between the siblings that they become so toxic by the time they are adults. Trying to repair those relationships is nearly impossible. And unfortunately, it's not uncommon for a sibling or two in the bunch to develop narcissistic personality disorder themselves, making a healthy relationship with them as an adult impossible for the non-disordered sibling. Another very disturbing reality of being raised in a narcissistic family is that children receive both verbal and nonverbal, untruthful and destructive messages about themselves that get internalized. And this also is a big contributing factor for the development of complex PTSD in the child, and starts to develop into a very abusive, cruel, and nasty inner critic. So the children in these families start to believe the abusive things they are being told about themselves, or the abusive ways they are being treated. And those messages become internalized and transform into a toxic belief system about themselves. It greatly damages their identity. So beliefs that can manifest from this abusive treatment could be, I'm not good enough to truly be loved, or I am a failure, or I am a waste of space and time, or I am unlovable. All, of course, not true. However, because they are constantly receiving these abusive messages from their abusive family members, they do become toxic core beliefs about themselves. Next, narcissistic families are all about image. Truly, nothing in these families is more important than image. And the children being raised in these families learn very early in life they are to adhere to the phony and fake facade and image their narcissistic parent demands they adhere to at all times. The reality that this is a completely dysfunctional family, or that the children are being narcissistically abused, are issues that don't matter to the narcissistic parents. Their only care is that their image is one of perfection. So essentially, the questions that these children learn to be consumed with are things like, what would the neighbors think? Or what would our extended family members think? These children are not ever taught to be concerned about their unique traits or building themselves into their own person based on their core interests, talents, or desires. These children are taught to make sure they portray an image that their narcissistic parent expects at all times. Another really unfortunate reality of being raised in a family like this is that narcissistic parents do not unconditionally love their children. They are disconnected from their kids. There is no real emotional connection or support that these children receive from their narcissistic parent and family members. So these children are being treated with judgment, a complete lack of empathy, and if any love or affection is shown to the child, it is completely conditional on what that child is providing to their narcissistic parent in the form of narcissistic supply. So these children usually grow up to have a very skewed and distorted understanding of what love looks and feels like, because in their home, love and abuse were two sides of the same coin. Next, usually in this family, although there can be many members that are highly narcissistic, usually there will be one head narcissist, and they will be the most domineering, the most abusive, and the most toxic. Typically, this narcissist is running the show, and no one dares ever go against that narcissist or confront them in any way. And what ends up happening is the other parent, even though they may also be a narcissist, ends up orbiting around the head narcissist, and eventually the children and other family members will learn to become consumed and obsessed with trying to keep the head narcissist happy at all times, because if they don't, there will be hell to pay for everyone in the household. Everyone living in a home like this learns that they have to walk on eggshells all the time, and that nothing is more important than making sure the head narcissist's needs are being met and that they are satisfied at all times. These families are not a democracy where everyone's needs are explored and considered. These families are governed by a dictator, a very abusive, controlling, disturbed, tyrannical dictator. Another really disturbing problem in these families is that boundaries between family members are usually non-existent. So no one is entitled to their personal belongings, their personal space, or any kind of normal human privacy. Gross boundary violations are the norm, and the parents and siblings believe they are entitled to whatever you have and to be involved in your business to the degree that they want. On top of that, if one of the family members learns something private about your life that you didn't want them to know, they have no problem using this information against you as leverage, blackmail, or to tease or humiliate you. That's all very normal in families like this. Another tragic dynamic in this family is the dysfunction and abuse can be overt or covert, and usually is a combination of both. So most times these children are treated with full-blown emotional and verbal abuse. Narcissistic rage is extremely common. However, much more covert abuse tactics are commonly used on the children also. So psychologically abusive things like gaslighting are being used on these kids as well. They are taught not to trust their own eyes, ears, perceptions, and beliefs about reality because their narcissistic parents are also mentally abusing and manipulating the children during the majority of their childhoods. So the damage that is done to their developing minds is usually profound. So in closing, for those of you who were raised in a narcissistically abusive family or suspect you were, in my opinion, it is critically important that you reflect and acknowledge the severity of what you were subjected to. Because without that recognition, without that understanding, you unfortunately could live your entire life believing that your family was a normal, functioning, or even loving family, which usually means we will pass down the trauma onto our own children. This is generational trauma, and understanding if you were narcissistically abused as a child is critical for healing and building a truly happy and healthy adulthood and environment for your own children. I unfortunately did not come to understand the depths of how incredibly abusive my upbringing was until well into my adult years and long after I became a mother. And unfortunately, because I did not have that knowledge, I walked right into a marriage with a man just like my father, whose family of origin was every bit as screwed up and dysfunctional as mine. I don't want any of you to make the mistakes I have made in your lives or the lives of your children. Okay, that's going to do it for today's video. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and please subscribe to my channel. Also, follow me on my other social media platforms. The links are in the description below. Thanks for watching, everyone.